You're fine? All right, we go to Chris Geisler then with this question. Back to the limited government pillar. We talked a little earlier about limited powers and the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. How has the federal government overstepped its constitutionally established authority by injecting itself into state government?
Where do you start? I mean, come on. I mean, the whole thing, you're right. The Constitution clearly articulates what the role of the federal government is by defining its powers, and what's not defined as a power in the federal government is given to the states and to the individual's rights. There's countless examples of where the government has overstepped its role and authority. Start with entitlement programs. Start with taxation. Start with the interference in free markets. Start with the exploitation of taxation telling people how they can interact with their government. It's constant. There are countless examples where the federal government has overstepped its role, steps on the Constitution like it's an old piece of paper with recommendations, as opposed to the actual rules of the road that were provided by our forefathers.
I've had the privilege of teaching American government at Oakton Community College for a number of years. One of my favorite discussions to get into is when we look at the Articles of Confederation in the Constitution.
Use the mic.
And I like to push my students because there is a big part of me that was an Articles of Confederation guy. Before the Constitution was set up with a very weak federal government and very strong, vibrant state governments. That's originally what the founders had in mind. The Constitution, folks, was a compromise. I think most of us in this room and a good, decent chunk of Republicans and independents right now subscribe much more closely to the Articles of Confederation, where so much more is given to the states. We've taken so much away from the states over the course of the last 200 years.
Flexibility. On my campaign, I surrounded myself with very smart people and advisors, and I asked one of the gentlemen who was a CFO for an international company and very politically astute, I said, tell me what's in the federal government that belongs to the state level, and tell me what's at the state level that belongs to the federal level, so I can talk intelligently on that. 4 weeks later, he comes back and says, it's impossible. If you look at what's in the federal government today, and you just Google it, you get an alphabet across the top. And you click on A, and you get 250 companies, or entities. These entities are piled on top, one after another, over the years, and we never take any away. One of the biggest problems we have with our country right now is we can't afford our government. We can't afford our government because we never downsize anything. We just add to it constantly. Again, we get back those 4 things in the national level and push everything down to the state and improve a lot of problems.
Look, our legislators should not be passing laws that they are not going to be holding themselves accountable to. H.R. 3962 uses the term tax 87 times, taxable 62 times, excise tax 10 times, penalty 113 times, require 118 times, must 58 times, shall 3,424 times. Do you know? It's curious. There's one section of that bill that does not use the term shall or must. Does anybody in the room know what section that is?
Yeah.
You got it. It's the section 330, and here's what it reads. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of this act, members of Congress may enroll in the public health option. They should not be passing laws that they're not holding themselves to.
Have they invented some new way of putting trousers on? Nobody is above the law. If they create a law, it is the law of the land. They should be held accountable to it. And if they're like that healthcare bill, what's good for the citizens in the country is good for the men and women that wrote the bill.
We've been on a slippery slope, I think, since Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. I think he's the one who started this bigger government that we are now just on a trajectory that is hard to believe and difficult to stomach. What's even more difficult is what's set up here is the elected officials that we have in office now dismiss Americans when they object to it, or when they stand up and say, wait, I've got some questions. I think it's important that we elect leadership that uses the Constitution for what it was intended and goes with it with every intention of going back to a smaller government.
Let me take my 30 seconds here. The 104th Congress did something interesting. It was considered radical at the time. The 104th Congress debated the Constitution. I think it should be mandated that a representative should go and have to debate the items in the Constitution before they even start any legislation. Go back and understand what the document's about, understand what its principles are, and make sure you have a good, solid understanding and discussion before you start passing any legislation.